Someone gave an AI zero constraints and told it to design the most ambitious motorhome concept imaginable, and it came back with this. 2 floors, 6 wheels, a rooftop garden, and what appears to be a fully glazed living room cantilevered off the side of the vehicle, like it borrowed that idea directly from a superyacht. Before we go any further, full transparency up front. What you are looking at is a fictional concept, generated by AI. No manufacturer, no price tag, no delivery date. Just a vision. But the design language embedded in this thing is sophisticated enough that it deserves a proper, serious breakdown, because some of the decisions made here are genuinely unlike anything I have analyzed on this channel before. Here is how we are going to do this. We are going to walk the exterior, and there is a lot of exterior to walk. Then we are going into the interior logic, then the powertrain, and finally my verdict. And I want to flag something now. There is one structural decision on the upper deck of this concept that stopped me cold when I first looked at this image. I am saving it for the interior section, because it deserves the full setup to land properly. Let's go. That front fascia is doing something most motorhome designers are too conservative to attempt. It is not a softened, aerodynamic nose. It is a statement. Heavily faceted, octagonal surfacing. Think industrial armor plating crossed with a luxury watch case, wrapped in continuous amber LED outlines that trace every panel break like a circuit diagram. The result is a front face that reads as simultaneously aggressive and architectural. The headlight clusters are set deep into recessed octagonal housings. That geometric repetition is not accidental. You see that octagonal language carried through the entire vehicle, from the wheel arches to the door frames to the corner pillars. When a designer commits to a single geometric motif across an entire surface language, that is not decoration. That is a design philosophy. Someone made a decision about what this vehicle's visual grammar was going to be, and they stuck to it everywhere. What does that communicate to you as a viewer? That this thing has an identity. Before it moves an inch, you know exactly what category it is playing in. Now step back and take the full profile in, because this is where the concept becomes genuinely extraordinary. This is a 2-story motorhome. Not a loft bed above the cab interpretation of 2 stories. Actually, 2 full floors stacked, with what appears to be floor-to-ceiling glazing running the entire length of the upper level. The roofline sits at a height that I would estimate using those 6-wheel arches as a scale reference, somewhere in the range of 5.5 to 6 meters. For context, a standard Class A motorhome tops out around 3.5 meters. This concept is operating in an entirely different height category. The glass-to-body ratio on this vehicle is extraordinary. The upper living level is almost entirely glass, dark-tinted, frameless, wraparound glass that in direct sunlight would flood whatever space is behind it with diffused natural light. The lower level glass is set into those armored octagonal frames, giving the impression of portholes on a naval vessel. The contrast between the 2 levels, open transparency above, protected containment below, is genuinely clever visual storytelling about how the spaces behind them are intended to be used. And then there is the cantilevered section on the passenger side. The designer has extended what appears to be a glazed living room or observation area out beyond the vehicle's main chassis line. That kind of slide-out or fixed extension in a concept like this suggests that the designer was thinking about the vehicle in parked mode as much as travel mode. This is not purely a vehicle. It is a deployable space. Here is where I will be honest with you. Aerodynamics on this concept are a clear secondary consideration. The upper deck has a swept leading edge and a rear roof cap that taper slightly. There is some gesture toward drag management, but the overall profile is essentially a high-sided box. At highway speeds, that translates to significant wind resistance. Now, in a real-world engineering context, that would be a serious concern for range on a full electric platform. But in conceptual territory, what it tells you is that the designer made a deliberate choice, presence over efficiency. This vehicle is not designed to slip through air quietly. It is designed to arrive. The finish is a two-tone combination of deep matte graphite on the lower structural sections and a brushed silver titanium on the upper cabin panels. Matte finishes in this context are communicating one thing: restraint. Gloss screams for attention. Matte accepts it. The amber LED tracing against the dark graphite base produces a warmth that keeps this from reading as cold or industrial. It reads as inhabited. Lived in. Like a building at night with lights on inside. There is also what appears to be real, or at minimum conceptual, greenery planted into the upper deck. Live plants running along the roofline. That is not a rendering trick. That is a design intent statement about how this vehicle relates to the natural world, even while being unmistakably technological. 6 wheels. 3 axles. Each hub framed in that same octagonal language as the rest of the vehicle, with amber trim rings completing the circuit. The stance is wide and low relative to the body height, which on a vehicle this tall is a necessary engineering decision to lower the center of gravity, but it also gives the concept a planted, almost immovable quality. This vehicle does not look like it would be pushed around by crosswinds. It looks like crosswinds would negotiate with it. The wheels also tell you something important about the intended use case. 3 axles typically appear on vehicles engineered for either extreme weight distribution or significant off-road capability. Given the overall concept, I suspect it is both, and I will come back to that in the powertrain section. But first, we need to go inside. And this is where the concept gets genuinely strange in the best possible way. Let me be clear about what we are doing here. There are no interior renders for this concept. What you are seeing is an AI-generated exterior. So what I am going to do is construct the interior logically, using the exterior proportions, the window placement, the structural decisions visible from outside, and treat it as a detective problem. Because the exterior of a well-designed vehicle almost always tells you exactly what is happening inside, if you know what to look for. Starting with the upper deck. If those wheel arches are standard scale, approximately 700 to 800 millimeters in diameter, then the upper floor ceiling height is somewhere between 2.1 and 2.4 meters. That is full stand-up height with room to breathe. That wraparound glazing at that ceiling height would create a light environment closer to a penthouse apartment than anything resembling a traditional motorhome interior. You would not feel enclosed. You would feel elevated. The lower deck, by contrast, sits closer to a 1.9 to 2.0 meter ceiling estimate, still livable, but more compressed. What that tells you is that the designer almost certainly intended the lower deck as the functional floor, cooking, bathroom, mechanical systems, and the upper deck as the experiential floor. The place you actually want to be. Working from front to rear, here is what the exterior logic suggests. The lower front section, directly behind that aggressive front face, is almost certainly the cockpit. The driver's visibility from that steeply raked windshield position would be commanding. Highway driving in something like this would feel more like piloting than driving. Behind the cockpit on the lower level, the transition into what I would call the service core, kitchen, bathroom, mechanical access, storage. These are not glamorous spaces, but they are the infrastructure that makes the glamorous spaces above functional. The cantilevered extension on the passenger side is the detail I flagged in the hook, and here is why it stopped me. That extension, based on its positioning relative to the rear of the lower deck, appears to sit directly above the rearmost axle. Extending livable space above a rear axle is structurally ambitious. The vibration management and acoustic isolation required to make that space feel like anything other than a mechanical room would be significant. But if they solved it, and in a concept like this, they have, what you end up with is a glass-surrounded observation pod that floats out over the rear wheel assembly. Imagine sitting in that space on a mountain road. The ground visible through the glass below you. The road visible through the glass ahead. That is not a motorhome feature. That is a private jet feature. The upper deck glazing, running the full length of the vehicle, suggests an open-plan living space that wraps around the interior perimeter. Natural light from three sides. The greenery visible along the roofline would not just be aesthetic. It would act as a natural diffuser for direct sunlight, creating dappled, warm light conditions inside, rather than the harsh greenhouse effect you would otherwise get from that much glass. That is a genuinely sophisticated passive design decision. Living in that space on a cloudy day at altitude, with the trees visible through the glass on both sides? I do not think there is anything on the road today that would replicate that feeling. Given the vehicle's overall positioning, the kitchen in a concept like this would not be a compromise. The lower deck depth is sufficient for full-size integrated appliances, induction surface, full refrigeration, concealed storage behind those panel-matched doors. The philosophy here is almost certainly hotel suite rather than caravan galley. Everything hidden until needed. Every surface flush when not in use. The upper rear section, positioned behind the main living area, is the logical sleeping zone. Away from the cockpit, away from the service core, with rear glass access for stargazing if the concept extends that roofline logic back far enough. Bed orientation would almost certainly be longitudinal, parallel to the direction of travel, which in a vehicle this wide gives you a genuinely full king-size sleeping format. That front-face windshield is near vertical by motorhome standards, which usually means a large, flat glass surface optimized for forward visibility over aerodynamic efficiency. In a real-world digital instrumentation setup, you would expect a full-width display arc, head-up projection capability, and in a concept at this level, autonomous highway mode as a baseline assumption. The driver in this vehicle is not wrestling with a steering wheel for 10 hours. They are supervising a route. The amber LED tracing that runs throughout the exterior surface language would, in a production logic scenario, double as the visible output of a building management system, lighting zones, climate zones, solar monitoring. The rooftop greenery requires active irrigation management. The glass area requires intelligent tinting. A concept this complex implies a central nervous system that manages the vehicle as a building, not just as a transport unit. If this were ever engineered for reality, the propulsion logic is actually fairly clear. 3 axles and a vehicle of this mass, I would estimate somewhere between 25,000 and 35,000 kilograms fully loaded, means the powertrain conversation starts with dual electric motors on the rear 2 axles as a minimum. That is not speculation. That is the math of moving this much weight efficiently. Single-axle drive on a vehicle this heavy would produce wheel spin, torque limitation, and range inefficiency that would make the concept non-functional. Battery capacity in a real-world build scenario would need to be in the 600 to 800 kilowatt-hour range to deliver meaningful range at this weight. For context, the heaviest electric coach platforms currently in development sit in the 400 to 500 kilowatt-hour range. So this concept is hypothesizing a battery technology advance of roughly 30 to 40% over current leading-edge platforms. That is ambitious but not science fiction. It is a plausible near-future scenario given current solid-state battery development trajectories. The solar roof logic here is genuinely interesting. That rooftop surface area, accounting for the planting zones, probably yields 8 to 12 square meters of usable solar panel area. At current panel efficiency, that is not a meaningful range extender for a vehicle this heavy. But it is a very meaningful off-grid system sustainer, running HVAC, lighting, water systems, and the smart building infrastructure without drawing from the main drive battery. In a parked scenario, this concept could potentially sustain interior comfort systems indefinitely in a sunny climate. That changes how you think about where this vehicle can go and how long it can stay there. The 3-axle all-wheel drive setup, combined with that high ground clearance visible in the profile, suggests the designer was thinking about access beyond paved surfaces. Not extreme off-road. The low-slung extensions and glass panels would not survive serious terrain, but elevated unpaved access. Forest roads, coastal treks, mountain passes. The kind of surface that most luxury motorhomes would refuse. So, let me give you my actual take. What this concept does genuinely well, the two-story format with that glass-to-body ratio on the upper deck, is the single most resolved aspect of this design. Most double-decker vehicle concepts get the proportions wrong. They either look top-heavy or they look like two vehicles stacked accidentally. This concept manages its height through the wide stance, the three-axle base, and the tapered roofline in a way that reads as intentional rather than accidental. The upper deck feels like it belongs there. What seems impractical? That cantilevered side extension. I love the idea of it, I genuinely do. But the engineering weight distribution implications of extending habitable space that far beyond the chassis line, directly above a rear axle, are significant. In a real build, you would either lose that feature entirely or you would compromise the interior to compensate for the structural reinforcement required. It is the most dramatic detail on the vehicle and probably the first thing a real engineering team would challenge. Most impressive detail, the rooftop planting. It sounds superficial, but it is not. Integrating live greenery into the roof of a moving vehicle requires irrigation management, root containment, wind protection, and weight distribution planning. The fact that this concept committed to it as a visible design element suggests a designer who is thinking about long-term habitation, not weekend trips, but genuine extended living. That shifts the entire brief of the vehicle. One thing I would change, the lower deck window treatment. Those armored octagonal frames read as slightly defensive against everything the upper deck is doing. The upper deck says openness. The lower deck says fortification. I understand the visual logic, protect the functional spaces, expose the experiential ones, but a thinner, more refined frame treatment on the lower glass would let the two levels have a conversation rather than an argument. What it signals about luxury mobility. This concept is not imagining the future of driving. It is imagining the future of living while moving. The distinction matters. The rooftop garden, the cantilevered observation zone, the full-height upper deck glazing. None of those decisions are about getting somewhere faster or more efficiently. They are about making the journey the destination. That is a fundamentally different design philosophy from every production motorhome on the road today, and I think it is pointing at something real about where high-end mobile living is heading. It is a concept. It is fictional. It is AI-generated. And it is still one of the most architecturally ambitious motorhome concepts I have analyzed on this channel. Here's my question for you, and I want your actual opinion on this. Rooftop garden or larger battery pack? If you could only have one, which would you prioritize for long-term off-grid living? Drop your answer below. I am genuinely curious whether this audience splits on that one. If this kind of design analysis is what you come to YouTube for, not specs, not test drives, but the actual thinking behind why a design works or does not, subscribing is the most efficient way to not miss the next one. New concept drops every week.